I stood there in Nashville International Airport, clutching a one-way ticket to nowhere, watching my own son and daughter-in-law walk away with my suitcases and my life savings. The cold October air from the automatic doors kept hitting me as travelers rushed past, but I couldn't move. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold that piece of paper, that cruel joke of a ticket they'd handed me before disappearing into the crowd. After 42 years of marriage, I thought the worst pain I'd ever feel was watching Harold take his last breath 6 months earlier. I was wrong, and I'm here in my kitchen in my new home in Willow Grove, Tennessee. I'm 67 years old now, and what I'm about to tell you will probably make you want to hug your own grandchildren a little tighter tonight. Or maybe it'll make you think twice about who you can really trust in this world. 6 months after burying my Harold, my best friend, my partner, my everything, my son Mark came to me with what seemed like a gift from heaven. "Mom," he said, sitting right there in my living room where Harold used to read his morning paper. "Tanya and I want to take you on a family trip. You need to get away from all these memories. We want to help you heal." I remember the tears in my eyes weren't from grief for once. They were from gratitude. Here was my boy, my only child, stepping up when I needed him most. When he asked me to help with expenses, I didn't hesitate. I took my grandmother's pearl necklace, my wedding diamond bracelet, and Harold's mother's emerald ring to 3 different jewelry stores in Nashville. Pieces that had been in our family for generations, sold to strangers for cash because I thought I was investing in something more precious: time with my family. Tell me in the comments what you're doing right now while you listen to my story. Are you having your morning coffee, folding laundry, or maybe taking a quiet moment for yourself? Hit that like button because each like is so important to help my voice reach other women who need to hear this. And subscribe to Grandma's Legacy because no woman should ever feel alone in her struggles. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, I'm sitting in my beautiful apartment with sunshine streaming through windows that overlook the most gorgeous garden you've ever seen. I have friends who check on me daily, activities that fill my heart, and peace I never knew was possible. The woman who was abandoned at that airport 18 months ago feels like a different person entirely. That morning in October 2019, I had no idea I was about to discover what real family actually looks like. And it wasn't the people who shared my blood. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. Not in that airport, but in 1952, when I was born in a small town outside of Memphis. My daddy left when I was 7, just packed up his truck one Tuesday morning and never looked back. Mama worked double shifts at the textile mill to keep us fed, and I learned early that love could disappear without warning, leaving you scrambling to understand what you did wrong. That fear of abandonment followed me into my teenage years, into my early 20s, right up until I met Harold Morrison at a church social in 1975. I was 23, working as a secretary at the county courthouse, and he was this steady, gentle man who fixed air conditioners for a living. Harold had these kind brown eyes that never looked away when you were talking, and hands that were always ready to help someone in need. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and I remember being terrified he'd change his mind. But Harold wasn't like that. When he said something, he meant it. When we married in 1977, he promised me 42 years, and by God, he gave me exactly that. Would have been more if cancer hadn't stolen him from me last spring. Our early years weren't easy financially. Harold's HVAC business was just getting started, and we lived in a tiny 2-bedroom house on Elm Street with a roof that leaked every time it rained hard. But we had dreams. We painted that little house sunshine yellow because Harold said it made everything brighter, and we planted a garden out back where we grew tomatoes bigger than your fist and green beans that snapped like firecrackers. Mark came along in 1979, 2 years after we married. Lord, that boy was the light of our lives. Harold would come home from work covered in dust and grease, but he'd always clean up and spend an hour rolling a ball around the living room with Mark, making airplane noises and telling him stories about brave little boys who could fix anything that was broken. As Mark grew up, Harold's business grew too. By the 1980s, Morrison HVAC was the most trusted name in 3 counties. We moved to a bigger house on Magnolia Drive with central air conditioning. Imagine that, the air conditioning man's family finally staying cool in Tennessee summers. We took vacations to Florida, bought Mark a bicycle that cost more than my first car, and started putting money away for his college education. Mark was a good student, played baseball in high school, and made us proud when he got into Vanderbilt on a partial scholarship. Harold worked extra jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't, never complaining once. "That boy's going to have opportunities we never had," he'd say, counting 20s at the kitchen table after a long day. But somewhere during those college years, Mark changed. Maybe it was being around kids from wealthy families, or maybe it was just growing up, but he started looking at our simple life differently. When he'd come home for holidays, he'd make comments about our outdated furniture or ask why we didn't drive newer cars. Harold would just shrug it off, saying boys had to find their own way in the world. Mark graduated with a business degree and moved to Atlanta, where he met Tanya. She was pretty in that polished way some city women are, with perfect makeup and clothes that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. I tried so hard to like her, to welcome her into our family, but she had this way of looking around our house like she was cataloging everything that wasn't good enough. They married in 2006 in Atlanta, a fancy ceremony that cost more than Harold and I spent on our first house. We drove down in Harold's old pickup truck because our car was in the shop, and I still remember Tanya's expression when she saw us pull up to that expensive hotel. Over the years, their visits became shorter and less frequent. Mark would call dutifully every few weeks, but the conversations felt rehearsed, like he was checking items off a list. "How's Dad's business? How's your health? How's the weather?" Never anything real, never anything that mattered. When Harold got sick in 2018, Mark came home twice, once when we got the diagnosis, and once for the funeral. Both times, Tanya stayed in Atlanta, saying she couldn't get away from work. I didn't push it. Grief makes you grateful for any kindness, even the smallest gestures. After Harold passed away in March 2019, I was drowning in loneliness. That big house on Magnolia Drive felt like a museum of memories, and every room echoed with his absence. The first few months after Harold's funeral were the darkest of my life. I'd wake up every morning reaching for his side of the bed, only to find cold sheets and silence. The house that had been filled with 42 years of laughter, conversations, and love became this hollow shell where every creaking board sounded like a ghost. I tried to keep busy. I joined the church's widow support group, volunteered at the local food bank, and even took a watercolor painting class at the community center. But nothing filled that Harold-sized hole in my heart. I'd come home every evening to that empty house and eat dinner alone, watching game shows that Harold used to complain about, missing even his gentle protests about my television choices. Mark called more frequently during those first months, which I thought was sweet. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he'd ask, and I'd tell him I was fine because that's what you do. You don't burden your children with your grief. But the truth was, I was barely surviving. Some days I'd forget to eat. Other days I'd find myself crying in the grocery store because I'd automatically picked up Harold's favorite coffee or the peppermint ice cream he loved. By late summer, Mark started dropping hints about my situation. He'd say things like, "Mom, that house is awfully big for just you," or "Are you sure you're managing okay all by yourself?" At first I thought he was being considerate, maybe worried about my safety or my ability to maintain such a large property. Then in September, during one of our Sunday phone calls, Mark said something that should have been my first real warning sign. "Mom, Tanya, and I have been talking, and we think you need to start thinking about your future more practically. You know, making some changes while you're still able to make good decisions." The way he said it made something cold settle in my stomach. "What kind of changes, honey?" "Well, like maybe downsizing or thinking about what you want to do with Dad's assets. The business, the house, all those investments you two worked so hard for. It's a lot of responsibility for one person." I should have questioned why my son was suddenly so interested in Harold's assets. Harold had built Morrison HVAC from nothing, And over the years, we'd accumulated a comfortable nest egg. Nothing extravagant, but enough to ensure I could live independently for the rest of my life. The business had been sold when Harold got too sick to work, and the money was safely invested in CDs and municipal bonds, just the way Harold had always been careful about our finances. "I'm managing just fine, Mark," I told him, but even as I said it, I could hear the defensiveness in my voice. "Of course you are, Mom. We're not questioning that. We just want to help you plan for the future." Over the next few weeks, those conversations became more frequent and more pointed. Tanya would get on the phone sometimes, her voice honey-sweet, but somehow calculating. "Blake, honey, Mark and I just worry about you rattling around in that big house all alone and managing all those financial decisions by yourself. It's so much stress for someone who's grieving." The word someone always stung. Not for you or for a person, but someone. Like I was just any generic elderly woman who couldn't be trusted to handle her own affairs. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in early October, and I was sitting in Harold's chair. I'd finally worked up the courage to sit there instead of just staring at it every night. Mark's voice was different, more excited than I'd heard him in years. "Mom, Tanya and I have an idea that we think could really help you." "What's that, honey?" "A trip, a family vacation, just the three of us. We want to take you somewhere beautiful, somewhere you can relax and start to heal from losing Dad." My heart just about stopped. When was the last time Mark had wanted to spend a whole vacation with me? When was the last time he'd called me anything other than Mom in that dutiful, distant way? "Where were you thinking?" I asked, and I could hear the hope creeping into my voice. "We haven't decided yet. Maybe somewhere warm, Florida or the Caribbean. Somewhere you can sit by the ocean and just breathe. What matters is that we'll be together, as a family." I started crying right there on the phone. Not the grief tears I'd been shedding for months, but tears of relief and gratitude. My son wanted to spend time with me. My son cared about my healing. "That sounds wonderful, Mark. When?" "Soon. We're thinking maybe in a few weeks. The thing is, Mom, it's going to be expensive. You know how Tanya and I are stretched right now with the Atlanta housing market and everything. We were hoping you might be able to help with the costs." And there it was, the first real hook, though I was too grateful to see it. "Of course, honey. How much do you need?" "Well, we're looking at maybe 8,000 or 10,000 for all three of us. Flights, hotel, meals, activities. We want it to be really special for you." $8,000 was a significant chunk of money, but I had it. Harold's life insurance had left me comfortable, and what was money compared to having my family back, compared to not being alone? "I can do that, Mark. I'll have to sell a few things, but I can do that." "Mom, are you sure? We don't want to impose." But I was already mentally cataloging my jewelry, thinking about which pieces I could bear to part with. "It's not an imposition, honey. It's an investment in our family." How wrong I was. The morning of October 15th, 2019 started like any other, except I woke up with butterflies in my stomach. The good kind, for the first time in months. I'd spent the previous week getting ready for our trip, though Mark had been surprisingly vague about the details. "Just pack light, Mom," he'd said. "We'll buy you anything you need when we get there." I'd sold my grandmother's pearl necklace to Henderson's Jewelry downtown for $1,800. The diamond bracelet Harold gave me for our 20th anniversary went for $3,000 to a dealer on Music Row. Hardest of all was parting with Harold's mother's emerald ring, the one she'd worn for 60 years before passing it down to me. That brought $4,500 from an estate buyer in Green Hills. Every sale felt like giving away a piece of my history, but I kept telling myself it was worth it. Material things could be replaced. Time with family was priceless. I kept one small jewelry box with my wedding ring and a simple gold chain Harold had given me for my 40th birthday. Everything else went toward this trip that was going to heal my broken heart. Mark picked me up at 7 in the morning, driving a rental car I didn't recognize. "Where's your truck?" I asked as I climbed into the passenger seat. "In the shop," he said, not looking at me. This was easier for the airport. Tanya was already in the back seat, scrolling through her phone. She looked up long enough to give me a tight smile. "Morning, Blake. Ready for your big adventure?" Something about the way she said your instead of our should have warned me, but I was too excited to pay attention to word choice. I chattered the whole way to Nashville International, talking about how long it had been since I'd flown anywhere, wondering out loud about where we were going. "It's a surprise, Mom," Mark said, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. At the airport, Mark parked in the short-term lot and grabbed a single suitcase from the trunk. Mine. "Where's your luggage?" I asked, looking around confused. "We're handling our bags separately," Tanya said quickly. "Different airline policies and all that." None of it made sense, but I trusted them. That's what family does. They trust each other, even when things seem confusing. Inside the terminal, Mark led me to the Delta counter. The ticket agent was a young woman with kind eyes who looked at the paperwork Mark handed her and then looked at me with something I couldn't quite identify. Was it pity? "One ticket to Orlando," she confirmed, handing me a boarding pass. "One way." "One way?" I looked at Mark, confused. "What about the return flight?" "We're handling that separately, Mom. Don't worry about the details." But I was starting to worry. Where were their boarding passes? Why wasn't anyone explaining anything to me? And why did that ticket agent keep looking at me like I was some lost child? We walked toward security, and that's when Mark stopped. "Mom, we need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. Whatever was coming, it wasn't good. "What is it, honey?" Tanya stepped forward, and suddenly her mask slipped. The honey-sweet voice was gone, replaced by something cold and businesslike. "Blake, this trip isn't exactly what we told you." "What do you mean?" Mark couldn't look me in the eye. He stared at the floor while Tanya delivered the blow that would change my life forever. "We bought you a ticket to Orlando, but we're not coming with you. This is a one-way ticket. We think you need to figure out how to be independent, and honestly, we can't keep worrying about you rattling around in that big house, making poor financial decisions." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered backward, reaching out to steady myself against a pillar. "What are you saying?" "We're saying it's time for you to start a new life somewhere else," Tanya continued, her voice getting stronger, more confident. "Orlando has great senior communities, warm weather, activities for people your age. You'll love it." But, but I don't know anyone in Orlando. I've never even been to Orlando." "And what about my house, my things, Harold's things?" Mark finally looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. "Mom, Tanya and I have been talking to a lawyer. You can't keep living in the past. Dad's gone, and you need to accept that and move on. The house is too much for you, and frankly, we're worried about your decision-making abilities. If you're feeling the pain of this betrayal with me right now, show your support. Hit that like button, comment if you've been through something similar, and subscribe because we strong women need to stick together through the darkest moments." "My decision-making abilities?" My voice came out as a whisper. "I just gave you $8,000 for this trip. I sold my grandmother's jewelry so we could be a family again." Tanya actually smiled. "And we appreciate that, Blake. That money will help us get you settled in your new life. Think of it as an investment in your independence." The airport was spinning around me. People were walking by, living their normal lives, while my world was collapsing in the middle of Terminal B. "You're stealing from me." "We're helping you," Mark said, but he still couldn't look at me. "Mom, you'll understand someday. This is what's best for everyone." "Everyone? Or just for you two?" Tanya handed me a small overnight bag, not my suitcase, just a tiny bag with a few items thrown in. "Your flight leaves in 2 hours, gate A12. There's a nice lady from a senior placement service who'll meet you in Orlando. She'll help you find an apartment and get settled." I looked at my son, this man I'd carried for 9 months, raised for 18 years, loved unconditionally for 40 years, and saw a stranger. "Mark, please, I'm your mother." For just a second his face crumpled, and I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares. But then Tanya touched his arm, and the moment was gone. "Take care of yourself, Mom," he said. And then they walked away. They just walked away, leaving me standing there with a one-way ticket to a city where I knew no one, holding a bag of belongings I hadn't even packed myself. That's when I understood what real abandonment felt like. For the first 10 minutes after they left, I just stood there like a statue in the middle of that busy airport, people flowing around me like I was a rock in a river. The boarding pass felt like it was burning in my hand, and my legs were shaking so badly I thought I might collapse right there on the polished floor. But then something happened that surprised even me. Instead of the crushing despair I expected, I felt something else rising up from deep in my chest. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger that cut through the shock like a sword through fog. Harold Morrison didn't raise a fool, and he sure didn't marry one either. I might be 67 years old, I might be grieving, and I might have just been betrayed by my own flesh and blood. But I was not going to stand in this airport and let them win. I walked straight to the Delta counter where that same kind-eyed ticket agent was helping another customer. When it was my turn, I slid that boarding pass across the counter and said, "I need to cancel this flight and get a refund." She looked at the ticket, then at me, and I could see the recognition in her eyes. "Ma'am, this is a non-refundable ticket, and it was purchased by someone else. I'd need their permission to make any changes." "The someone else who purchased it just abandoned me here," I said, my voice steady and clear. "They bought me a one-way ticket to a city where I know no one and don't want to be, took my money under false pretenses, and left me stranded. I'm not getting on that plane." The ticket agent, her name tag said Jennifer, looked around nervously. "Ma'am, let me get my supervisor." While I waited, I pulled out my cell phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Robert Chen, Esquire. Bobby had gone to high school with Harold, and they'd stayed friends over the years. He'd handled our wills, our business contracts, and had been one of the pallbearers at Harold's funeral. "Bobby?" I said when he answered. "It's Blake Morrison. I need your help, and I need it right now." "Blake, how are you holding up? What's wrong? You sound upset." Standing right there in the airport, with travelers rushing past me and announcement echoing overhead, I told Bobby everything. The trip that wasn't a trip, the money I'd given them, the jewelry I'd sold, the way they'd abandoned me with a one-way ticket to nowhere. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Bobby spoke, and his voice was tight with anger. "Blake, what they've done to you is financial elder abuse. It's a felony in Tennessee." "I don't want to press charges against my own son," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure I meant it. "We'll talk about that later. Right now, I want you to get in a taxi and come straight to my office. Don't go home, don't call Mark, don't do anything until we talk. Can you do that?" "Yes, I can do that." The Delta supervisor had appeared by then, a middle-aged man with a name tag that read Manager Customer Care. Jennifer had obviously filled him in because he looked at me with genuine sympathy. "Mrs. Morrison, given the circumstances, we're going to refund this ticket in full, even though it's against policy. And if you need any documentation for legal purposes, we'll be happy to provide it." I thanked them both, declined their offer to help me file a complaint against Mark and Tanya, and walked out of that airport with my head held high. In the taxi on the way to Bobby's office, I made a decision that would have shocked the broken woman who'd woken up that morning. I wasn't just going to survive this betrayal. I was going to make sure Mark and Tanya never had the chance to do this to me again. Bobby's office was in a converted Victorian house in downtown Nashville, the kind of place that whispered old money and older wisdom. He was waiting for me in the lobby, this short, round man with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He'd aged since Harold's funeral, but then again, so had I. "Blake," he said, wrapping me in a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." In his office, surrounded by law books and family photos, I told him everything again, in detail. He took notes, asked questions, and gradually, the picture became clear. "They planned this," he said finally. "The timing, the way they got you to liquidate assets, the one-way ticket. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. They've been planning this for weeks, maybe months. But why? I would have helped them if they needed money. I would have done anything for Mark." Bobby leaned back in his chair and studied me with those sharp eyes. "Blake, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What does your will look like right now?" And that's when I understood. Mark wasn't just stealing from me in the present. He was positioning himself to inherit everything I had when I died. By getting me declared mentally incompetent or abandoned in Florida, he could probably even accelerate that process. "Bobby," I said, "I want to change my will. I want to change it today." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, documentation, and phone calls that Mark and Tanya definitely weren't expecting. Bobby Chen worked like a man possessed, and I realized that Harold had been right about him all those years. Bobby was the kind of lawyer you wanted in your corner when the world was falling apart. First, we documented everything. Bobby had me write out a detailed timeline of events from the first conversation about the trip to that moment in the airport. We gathered receipts from the jewelry sales, bank records showing the money I'd transferred to Mark's account, and even got a written statement from Jennifer at Delta confirming the circumstances of my abandoned ticket. "Blake, what they did to you meets the legal definition of exploitation of an elderly person in Tennessee," Bobby explained during one of our meetings. "The penalties are severe, up to 15 years in prison and substantial fines." "I still don't want to press criminal charges," I said, though part of me was wavering. "But I want to make sure they can't do this again." Bobby nodded like he'd expected that response. "Then we focus on civil remedies and asset protection. But Blake, I need you to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly when they find out what we're doing." The new will was comprehensive and ironclad. Instead of leaving everything to Mark, as my previous will had done, I was creating a trust that would donate my entire estate to the Tennessee Coalition Against Elder Abuse. Every penny, every asset, every investment Harold and I had worked 42 years to build would go toward helping other elderly people who'd been victimized by their own families. "Are you sure about this?" Bobby asked as I signed the documents. "Once this is done, Mark gets nothing, not even a sentimental item." I thought about Harold's mother's emerald ring, probably sitting in some pawn shop now. I thought about the pearl necklace my grandmother had worn on her wedding day, sold to fund my son's betrayal. I'm sure. But the will was just the beginning. Bobby also helped me set up a revocable trust for my immediate assets, making me the sole beneficiary during my lifetime, but ensuring that Mark couldn't claim any financial authority over my affairs. We changed all my bank accounts, updated my power of attorney documents, and even put a credit freeze on my accounts to prevent any future financial manipulation. Mark called on the 3rd day after the airport incident. I was sitting in Bobby's office when my phone rang, and Bobby nodded for me to answer it. Mom, where are you? I went by the house and you're not there. Are you okay?" The concern in his voice might have fooled me a week earlier, but now I could hear the calculation behind it. He was worried, but not about my well-being. He was worried about his plan. "I'm fine, Mark. I'm in Nashville taking care of some business." "What kind of business?" "Mom, you're scaring me. After Dad died, and then the stress of travel, maybe you should come home and rest." Bobby was taking notes, documenting Mark's attempt to paint me as mentally unstable. "I'm not tired, Mark. In fact, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months." "Mom, about the trip. I know it didn't go the way we planned, but we can figure something else out. Maybe a shorter trip, somewhere closer to home." "There won't be any more trips, Mark." The silence stretched out until I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Mark spoke again, and this time the mask was completely gone. "Mom, what exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that I know what you and Tanya did to me. I know you planned it. I know you stole from me. And I know you left me in that airport hoping I'd just disappear into some Florida retirement home and stop being an inconvenience." "Mom, that's not... You're not thinking clearly. Grief does things to people, makes them paranoid, and I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Mark. And I've made some decisions you're not going to like. Bobby gave me a thumbs up. Mark was making our case stronger with every word. What kind of decisions? You'll find out soon enough, but Mark, don't call me again unless you're ready to apologize for what you did and make restitution for the money you stole. And even then, I'm not sure I'll answer. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but it was adrenaline, not fear. For the first time since Harold died, I felt like myself again, strong, decisive, and absolutely done with being anyone's victim. 2 days later, Tanya called. She'd obviously coached Mark on a different approach because her voice was sickeningly sweet. "Blake, honey, Mark told me you two had a misunderstanding. I'm so sorry about the confusion with the trip. We never meant for you to feel abandoned." There was no confusion, Tanya. There was theft and abandonment and a calculated plan to get rid of me. But don't worry, I'm taking care of myself just fine. Blake, we love you. You're family. I almost laughed. Family doesn't steal from each other, Tanya. Family doesn't abandon each other in airports, and family sure doesn't try to have each other declared incompetent to steal their inheritance. The sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit the target. She hadn't expected me to figure out that part of their plan. Within a week, Bobby received a letter from an Atlanta law firm representing Mark and Tanya, questioning my mental competency and demanding access to my financial records. We'd been expecting it. "Let them come," I told Bobby. "I'm ready." 3 months after that terrible day at Nashville Airport, I was sitting in the sunny community room at Willow Grove Independent Living, playing Scrabble with 3 women who had become closer to me than my own son had ever been. It's funny how life can surprise you when you least expect it. The decision to move to Willow Grove hadn't been part of any grand plan. After all the legal work with Bobby was settled and the new will was safely filed away, I found myself rattling around in that big house on Magnolia Drive with nothing but memories and the echo of my own footsteps. Even though I'd won the battle against Mark and Tanya, even though I'd protected myself from future exploitation, I was still alone. That's when Bobby suggested I might want to consider a change of scenery. "Not because anyone's making you," he said quickly, "but because you deserve to be around people who appreciate you." Willow Grove was just 20 minutes from downtown Nashville, but it felt like a different world entirely. Instead of the sterile, institutional feeling I'd expected, it was like stepping into the warmest, most welcoming neighborhood you could imagine. The buildings were designed to look like cottages, with front porches and flower boxes and walking paths that meandered through gardens that looked like something from a magazine. My tour guide was a woman named Dorothy Henderson, 72 years old, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and eyes that sparkled with mischief. "Let me guess," she said within 5 minutes of meeting me. "Your children think you need supervision." "Something like that," I said carefully. Dorothy laughed, a sound like wind chimes on a summer day. "Honey, half the people here came because their families were driving them crazy, and the other half came because their families abandoned them entirely. But you know what we've all discovered? Sometimes the family you choose is better than the one you were born with." She was right. Within a week of moving into my bright, airy apartment with its full kitchen and private patio, I had more genuine friendship than I'd experienced in years. There was Dorothy, of course, but also Margaret Chen, no relation to Bobby, who'd been a high school principal for 30 years and had stories that could make you laugh until your sides hurt. And Ruth Ann Williams, whose husband had left her for his secretary after 40 years of marriage, and who responded by learning to play poker and winning the monthly tournament 3 months running. These weren't the broken, lonely women I'd expected to find in a senior community. These were vibrant, intelligent, funny people who'd simply reached a point in their lives where they wanted to be around others who understood what it meant to have lived through joy and loss and everything in between. We had book clubs and garden clubs and a hiking group for the more adventurous residents. There was a woodworking shop where Harold would have spent every day, and an art studio where I finally had time to pursue the painting I'd abandoned when Mark was small. Most importantly, There was a sense of community I'd never experienced, even in my own neighborhood back on Magnolia Drive. The best part was Sunday dinners. Every week, a different group of residents would cook for the whole community. Nothing fancy, just good, home-style food shared around tables that seated 8. The conversations ranged from politics to grandchildren to travel dreams, and I realized I was laughing more than I had in years. About 6 months after I moved to Willow Grove, I got a call from a social worker in Atlanta. Mark and Tanya were having financial difficulties, something about a failed business venture and mounting debt. They were wondering if I might be willing to help them out, perhaps with a loan against my estate. I listened politely to the whole spiel, then said, "Please tell them that my estate planning is complete and final. If they need financial advice, I recommend they speak to a qualified professional." After I hung up, Dorothy, who'd been sitting nearby during the call, looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Let me guess. The family that abandoned you wants money?" "Something like that." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them no." Dorothy raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "Good for you, Blake. The best revenge is living well." And I was living well. Better than well, actually. I joined the Willow Grove Volunteer Corps, where we organized community outreach programs for isolated seniors in the area. Every Tuesday, I'd drive to different neighborhoods in Nashville, delivering groceries and companionship to elderly people who reminded me of the woman I could have become if I'd stayed trapped in that house, waiting for a son who never really cared. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was helping other seniors avoid the exact fate Mark and Tanya had planned for me. I also started dating, which surprised everyone, including myself. His name was Frank Carruthers, a retired teacher who'd moved to Willow Grove after his wife passed away 2 years earlier. Frank had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle sense of humor that reminded me of Harold, though they were completely different men. Our first date was a group trip to the Nashville Symphony, organized by the Community Activities Director. Frank sat next to me during the concert, and when the orchestra played Pachelbel's Canon, Harold's favorite piece, Frank quietly handed me his handkerchief without making a big deal about my tears. "My wife loved that piece too," he whispered. "It's okay to miss them and still enjoy the music." That's when I knew Frank understood something important about love and loss and moving forward. We weren't trying to replace what we'd had before. We were building something new from the wisdom and scars we'd both earned. Within a year, Frank and I were inseparable. We'd take morning walks around the community gardens, play bridge with Dorothy and her partner James every Thursday night, and travel together to places Harold and I had never had the chance to see. Frank had a small RV, and we'd take weekend trips to the Smoky Mountains or down to Savannah, collecting memories like souvenirs. The best part about Frank was that he never tried to fix my relationship with Mark. He never suggested that family is family or that I should forgive and forget. Frank understood that some betrayals are too deep to heal, and that choosing to protect yourself doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a survivor. Sitting here in my kitchen this morning, watching Frank tend to the herbs we planted on my patio, I can hardly believe that terrible day at Nashville Airport was only 3 years ago. The woman who stood there clutching that one-way ticket, devastated and abandoned, feels like someone I knew in another lifetime. People ask me sometimes if I regret cutting Mark out of my life completely, if I miss having a relationship with my only child. The answer is complicated, but it's honest. I miss the son I thought I had, but I don't miss the man he actually turned out to be. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was accepting that the Mark who used to fall asleep in my lap reading stories, the Mark who cried when his goldfish died, the Mark I thought I'd raised to be kind and loving, that Mark had never really existed. Or maybe he had existed once, but somewhere along the way, greed and selfishness had killed him. I learned that you can love someone deeply and still refuse to let them destroy you. I learned that blood doesn't make someone family, and that family doesn't give you the right to abuse someone's trust. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start over, to find your people, to build a life that brings you joy instead of just obligation. The Tennessee Coalition Against Elder Abuse contacted me last year to tell me that my estate planning had inspired them to create a new program for seniors who'd been financially exploited by family members. They're calling it the Harold and Blake Morrison Fresh Start Initiative, and it provides emergency housing, legal assistance, and counseling for elderly people who find themselves abandoned or betrayed by their own children. Knowing that our life's work, mine and Harold's, will continue to help people long after I'm gone gives me more satisfaction than any family reunion ever could. Last month, I got a Christmas card from Mark and Tanya. No return address, just a generic card with a printed message about hoping for reconciliation and family being the most important thing. I threw it away without a second thought. Frank saw me do it and didn't ask any questions. He just put his arm around me and suggested we go look at the new rose bushes the garden club had planted. That's what real love looks like. Not manipulation disguised as concern, not conditional affection based on what you can provide, but simple, steady presence and support. If this story of survival and strength touched your heart, like this video right now, tell me in the comments what gave you courage in your darkest moments, and subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because every grandmother deserves to have her voice heard and her story valued. To any woman listening to this who's dealing with family betrayal, financial abuse, or the kind of manipulation that makes you question your own worth, listen to me carefully. You are stronger than you know. You deserve better than you're getting. And it is never, ever too late to choose yourself. Trust your instincts, protect your assets, and don't let anyone convince you that family means tolerating abuse. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to treat you with respect, even if they share your DNA. I'm 70 years old now, and I wake up every morning in a home filled with laughter and surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. I have Frank, who loves me without agenda, and friends who choose to spend time with me because they enjoy my company. Mark and Tanya thought they were getting rid of a burden when they abandoned me at that airport. Instead, they set me free to find the life I was meant to live. And honey, that life is beautiful.